The righteous continue to be righteous as the Lord has ordained the church to be, and to point out to the world the things that are to come. This is an interesting subject. I don't know if you heard. This is Answers in Genesis in Kentucky. They're planning to build the Tower of Babel. Yeah.
Wait, where?
Our culture has been inundated by false views of our origins that we evolved from ape-like ancestors. Most evolutionists are probably not racist, but the philosophy they hold is inherently racist, implying that some people groups are more closely related to apes than others. By eliminating our true history, evolutionists are left with a false view of humanity. Thus, they explain the so-called racial differences through the lens of a fundamentally racist philosophy. The Bible provides us with the true history of humanity. What people classify today as racial differences are rightly explained by the Babel event. Noah's descendants scattered from Babel in family groups and settled in new lands. Separated from one another, the various groups began to express distinct traits. No group is more evolved than any other. I don't know how much you have investigated this idea of race. You've looked at the different colors of people, and well, the language is very distinct in the Bible. It's very pointed out. It's pointed out directly that God changed the languages. But it doesn't really talk about the pigmentation of the skin. And so that's kind of left up to us to try to understand through biblical terms. We know that God did it. We don't exactly know how he did it. And even really, to some extent, why. I guess we can probably figure out why, because it separates the people as well. The borders, the languages, and even the looks and the culture are different. Cultures are different. When we try to force them together, we're doing the Babel thing again. So it's interesting. I thought this is a sign of the times as well. I like Answers in Genesis. They force issues. We talk about the Spirit and God holding back the flood tide of evil, as Joe rightly prays all the time, and the Bible specifically says that he does until the end times. And how, in a way that he does that is through his people. When we call out those things that are just anti-God, we do it through individuals, talking to individuals and families and stuff, but we do it through organizations like this as well. And Answers in Genesis is a great one. So we're very happy to see that. Another interesting thing that's happened in a U.S. city, this is in Florida, abandons political correctness and goes nonstop for God 24 hours a day. This has actually been happening for a little while. So they are, I can't remember what day it is, but is it Veterans Day? I think it was on Veterans Day. I think it's Veterans Day that this city and the mayor and everybody and the council and everybody stands behind this group, and they stand and read the Bible for 24 hours. So that's really neat.
What city is it?
I can't remember. It's in Florida. I know it's in Florida. It's a smaller city as well. Thunderous chants of "Let's Go Biden" erupt at a Governor Ron DeSantis bill signing to prevent vaccine mandates in Brandon, Florida. Now, I've touched on this, and there's some issues that I go, I'm not sure I want to touch on or stay, in contact with a little bit. I want to stay on this one a little bit, but I want to be careful to suggest, and I totally understand what "Let's Go Brandon" means. It is not good, okay? When people are chanting it, it is not good, all right? Now, on the one side, there's a people party, a people group in our nation that doesn't want Biden as president anymore. And so they've picked this up, a bunch of them have picked this up as their chant. And so it really goes along with that whole thing that we need to be careful about this kind of stuff. Like when we hear somebody say, let's go, Brandon, we say, well, that's anti-Biden and I'm for that. I'm for that. However, what was behind it is not good. It's actually demeaning, okay? It's demeaning. It's like those young ladies standing out here with a sign, that sign that we showed. So we need to be careful and get caught up in this. This is what I'm suggesting, have been suggesting for about the last year and maybe more, but what I see clearly, and I don't know what you're seeing, but what I see clearly is this idea that the divide between the Democrats and the Republicans is one thing. The divide between the conservatives and the progressives is a deeper thing. And the divide between the world and the church is even deeper. And that's what's happening, okay? So it starts with the Democrats and Republicans. It goes to the progressives and the conservatives. For instance, just an example, if the progressives have the government, they're going to target the conservatives, which they have. And we hope that if 2022 or 2024 changes, we hope that we don't target them as a group, but we target their policies, okay? So that's another thing. But watch this. The QAnon, this is a tweet by somebody, the Patriot Takes. The QAnon crowd is at televangelist John Hagee's Cornerstone Church in San Antonio. They are chanting, "Let's go Brandon," from the church pews. Now remember what "Let's go Brandon" means. It is not right. The concept behind it, some find humorous. I mean, giggle a little bit or here and there, but in reality, it's not right. And now a church has picked it up. Now the church later said, well, we weren't for this and we weren't behind this, but there was a leader up front leading this. And so John Hagee, there's some issues with some of his teaching. In general, I think he's okay, but there are some issues there. I'll just leave it at that. But he is pro-Israel. He's a very conservative man as far as that goes. But to allow that, they should have stopped this right off the bat. This is not happening here, And so we need to be careful that we're not caught up in this. And you can see somebody pointed out the QAnon issue, and it goes back to that. See, the white evangelicals, which they are, I think they've singled themselves out for that. It's not anybody else doing that. But they are now singled out as the QAnon conspiracy theorists. And so you see this carries on past the Trump elections, okay? The Christian Post, the decline of streaming worship services. This was bound to happen. I usually like to see 2 or 3 posts more about this, gives this some time, but I want to put this in front of you tonight because I want to watch what happens here. Over 9 out of 10 church leaders describe their church's decline in attendance and streaming worship services as major. Many of them say the decline is at least 90% from its peak during the pandemic. While we certainly anticipated that many churches would return to in-person worship after the quarantine, we were not prepared for the magnitude of decline in digital services. So now the question is, and this is what we want to kind of track, is are people returning to church? And that, therefore, there's a decline in digital services. That's a good thing. That's actually okay. That's good, actually. We want to be in person. And we know that some of that is taking place. What we're concerned about is people that have stepped aside to do digital and then said, well, there's no place back there for me, or I don't want to go back, or I'm more comfortable at home, or whatever that is. You lose that contact. And to be frank with you, some of that has happened here. Not a lot, to be frank. There hasn't been a lot of it, but there's been a little. that we sort of lose contact with people. And we don't want that to happen. So we're going to track this and see what happens, because we want these people to come back to church. The Wuhan Chinese virus numbers are going up again, not just nationwide, but I mean some certain states and some countries, some nations. So that's happening now. As the numbers seem to have been going down, they're peaking again in some places. The Christian Post says that the great shrinking church in America is happening. It is clear that many churches have closed or have considerably shrunk in size since COVID-19. Reasons range from churchgoers are still scared to return to they prefer watching live feeds. But why have bold church experiences tremendous? I'm sorry. Let's read this correctly. But why have bold churches experienced tremendous growth? ? This issue is much deeper. It's crystal clear that people are hungry for the truth. As a church in California located in Los Angeles County, I understand the enormous challenges of pastoring in these dire times. But if the truth be told, the COVID crisis simply revealed the foundation of many churches as well as the heart of many pastors. That last line is what we've been talking about here. That these things that have come to our nation and come to our world is revealing what is in the hearts of many. And I go back to this idea. President Obama revealed what was hidden underneath the surface in America. That president. And so did President Trump. So we say President Obama caused this. No, he didn't. His presidency revealed it. And so did President Trump's. It's revealing it. So is President Biden's. It's revealing the undercurrent, those things that are lying under the surface in our country. And to be honest with you, again, going back to Zechariah, when this whole concept where he sends the horsemen out and the horsemen come back saying everything's at peace, and God was not happy. So he's searching the hearts of men. He's looking at the nations and he's going, this is not how I want things to be. And at that case in Zechariah, things were at peace, and he said, there's not going to be any peace anymore, because they're at peace at cost of the righteous and the cost of his name and his glory. So he stirs it up. He stirs it up. And so now, when they're talking about these bold churches, there's some strong churches that have gotten bigger. And we've talked about Jack Hibbs' church growing. I don't know if they leaps and bounds, but they've baptized a lot of people. I've saw at least 2 groups, so 2,500, 3,000 people in the last year and a half or 2 years. John MacArthur's church and some other churches are growing. And interesting, they're in California. But other churches are feeling the pinch financially and by people not coming back. So again, we're going to continue to watch this. Pastors, I'm writing this to you to encourage you to be bold as you lead your congregation through these difficult and challenging times. But this boldness won't come naturally, it will come supernaturally. It will have a cost. Life-giving preaching costs the preacher much: death to self, crucifixion to the world, and travail of his own soul. Crucified preaching only can give life. Crucified preaching can only come from a crucified man. Speaking boldly is no longer optional, it's essential. That's the missing ingredient today. God is no respecter of person's status or achievement, but he is a respecter of principles. And so I think this was just a pointed point that we should continue to have in front of us in this church and other churches that are represented here. If you seek him with all your heart, you will find him. Then you will be better equipped to lead your congregation to the fountain of living water once you yourself have drunk deeply. This doesn't mean that your church will grow. It could shrink. But it does mean that you now have the power of the Spirit resting upon your life. Churches filled with the Spirit do the work of the Spirit, Jesus said that whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these because I'm going to the Father. And so that's just a reminder for us, and I think it's a very timely reminder. Just get into the natural things here for a minute. This was a day, and again, I think this was on Veterans Day, Thursday. This was on Veterans Day. And look at the sixes. Several of them rocked the plate. Most of them were in the water. There was some things happening even in Greece and Turkey. Significant earthquakes around the planet that day. It's been really relatively quiet. And this is, to be frank, this is just one of my issues, and I've told you about this. I've watched this for decades. But one of these days, this thing's going to go supernatural. And I don't know why. I just keep looking at it, and because Jesus talked about it. I do know why. Because Jesus talked about it. It was right up front in his talk in Matthew 24 and Luke 27. Floodings on the West Coast. This was just a picture of somebody. Water was up to their knees. They were standing on the couches, and this was happening on top of the fire. So now they got mudslides. They had roads cut off to towns and all kinds of things on the West Coast.
Is that Vancouver or was that?
No, it was on the coast below. Is by Olympia, south of Olympia, Washington, the capital of Washington. There, on what they call it, the peninsula in there. So, virtual reality. Facebook. Let's go back to Facebook and why they changed their name. And we're not going to let this drop real quick. Why they changed their name to Meta. Just a reminder that the Hebrew word for death is meta. So, Facebook chief executive Zuckerberg recently announced the tech giant will shift from being a social media company to becoming a metaverse company, functioning in an embodied internet. First of all, I don't even know what that means. So we're going to hammer this out a little bit, but he made a significant change, and he's on top of one of the world's richest companies. So we got to find out what they're doing here a little bit. That blends real and virtual worlds more than ever before. So let's just stop there for a second. That even sounds scary. Now people play games, like Pokemon. We've mentioned Pokemon before. And some other things where you're carrying a game in reality and you're playing it on this earth in real time, but with a false narrative, in like a cartoon setting almost. Okay, so they're blending these two things, not for a game, but for the reality of things. And I think this should be concerning to us. Over the coming decades, the metaverse has the potential to become a multi-trillion-dollar part of the world economy. The next 3 years are going to be critical for all of the metaverse aspiring companies like Epic, Roblox, Microsoft, Facebook. It's kind of a race to get to a billion users. Whoever brings on a billion users first would be the presumed leader in setting the standards. Now, before we go on, I just want to suggest something. And this is just how my mind works. But this kind of reminds me of like stocks, or reminds me in particular like of Bitcoin, okay? Where there isn't any money out there. There's no real money. There's just numbers. There's just a lot of numbers. It's like the $1 trillion package that the United States just signed. There isn't $1 trillion out there. It's a number. And really, I used my debit card today to buy something for the shed that I'm still building. And I had to use my debit card, and I never gave them a dime. It just transferred a number. Is there money in my bank account? It says there is. But come a complete disaster, go try to get $1,000 out of your bank account, because it's really honestly not there. Over the coming decades, Yeah, we read that. So over the coming decades, the metaverse has the potential to become a multi-trillion-dollar part of the world economy. The CEO said at a conference in Seoul on Tuesday, the next 3 years are going to be critical. So 3 years are going to be critical for all the metaverse aspiring companies like these companies we mentioned. It's kind of a race to get to 1 billion users. I don't know why I just used the same thing over again. Humans have developed many technologies to trick, here it is. Humans have developed many technologies to trick our senses, from audio speakers and televisions to interactive video games and virtual reality. And future, we may develop tools to trick our other senses, such as touch and smell. We have many words for these technologies: the physical world and our fabricated extensions to reality, the virtual world. Words like the internet and cyberspace have come to be associated with places we access through screens. They don't quite capture the steady interweaving of the internet with virtual realities, i.e. the 3D game worlds, the virtual cities, and augmented reality, i.e. the navigation overlays, the Pokemon Go. It also helps that metaverse is a poetic term. Academics have used the name extended reality for years, but it's a rather dull name. Metaverse was coined by science fiction writer Neil Stephenson in his 1992 novel, Snow Crash. I don't know what that novel is. It'd probably be interesting to read it. I really don't just have time. But this is going to the quantum stuff. This is going to the AI stuff. This is going to the Bitcoin stuff. This is going into that sense. Now, I don't know if you remember, but about 6 months ago or more, I showed you a picture of two people standing in two different nations. I'm trying to remember, one was Netherlands or Belgium, and then I can't remember where the other one was. I don't remember where they were, okay? But they're standing in front of a big screen, and they're talking to each other. Like they're right next door. Like you're right across the border, you're in Germany and I'm in Belgium, and I'm talking to you. But they were hundreds of miles, if I can't remember, 1,000 miles apart or not. But that's where they're kind of going. They're bringing that virtual stuff, which isn't real, to our doorstep. And what's the end game? And my mind always goes to this whole idea about the Antichrist. And remember that big 3D statue? You know, remember, I mean, we're kind of amazed at that stuff. But when the Antichrist comes to the world, the people are going to be staggered by what he looks like, who he is, what he does, what he knows. So if we're looking at this and we're like overcome and not understanding this, think about what is coming. It's going to be staggering. It's going to amaze the world. LifeSite News. This gentleman is the Austrian government, the head of the Austrian government. The Austrian government announced Friday it will require all citizens to be vaccinated against the Wuhan virus starting in February of 22. In the meantime, the country will go into full lockdown starting Monday, as daily new cases have risen to record levels. Thursday, even though all unvaccinated citizens are already locked down. Despite an intensive media campaign, we have not been able to convince enough people to get vaccinated. Now, okay, I'm reporting what LifeSite News is saying, YouTube. Okay? You want to shut me down, that's probably going to be the cost. But I'm simply saying this doesn't make any sense to me. No sense. Except you can't stop this bug. That's my opinion. Despite an intensive media campaign, we have not been able to convince enough people to get vaccinated. For a long time, the political consensus was not to introduce mandatory vaccinations, but we must look reality in the eyes. And it's their reality. We just go back to the virtual reality thing and start talking about that again. This is their reality, and this is what they're doing. Australia is doing much of the same thing. Here's an example from the Wall Street Journal. Can everybody read that? Okay, just let me know if you can't read it. Okay, that's an example. Okay? The FDA, on top of all this, the FDA asked the court for 55 years to fully release the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine data. 55 years. I think they gave JFK files 50 years. I think that's what happened. I'm not going to suggest what you do with that comparison, but OSHA suspends the enforcement of the vaccine mandate for businesses. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration is suspending enforcement of the Biden's administration vax mandate for large private businesses after a federal appeals court upheld a stay on its last week. Now, this is not over, but this court stayed this, and OSHA jumped right on it and canceled the mandate. So we'll see what that looks like going forward. And we're just not going to be able to really just lay the virus aside. We're just going to have to keep track of what it's doing because it has changed the world, which, you know, doesn't take a rocket scientist to suggest that, but it continues to still divide the world. Zero hedge. Protests were observed in downtown Boston, Massachusetts, Chicago, Illinois, Brooklyn, New York, and Portland, Oregon, where a riot was declared at 9 p.m. after hundreds of demonstrators unleashed rage by smashing windows and hurling objects at police after the Rittenhouse verdict. So here we go again. I don't need to say any more than that. Now, it was funny, last Sunday night, I got a text from Kathy, and she said, this is on 60 Minutes, and I had already looked at that and said, I need to watch these two programs on 60. Actually, there was one, it was on the cargo shipping. Now, anybody see that? Shipping cargo, and then the one after that was really interesting. I just suggest to you that the shipping cargo thing was everybody's blaming everybody else, and there's record numbers of ships at Long Beach, the largest port in America, and they're still sitting out there waiting to get unloaded. Everybody's blaming everybody else. Texas and Florida is stepping up and taking some of those shipments and those kinds of things, but there's still a lot of unlocking to do. I don't want to really go into that. We're going to have to carry that out. When Christmas shows up, we'll see what all the shells look like. But there is something that I do want to talk about, which is the second story. His name is Andrew Sullivan. He's an Englishman, and he's a conservative. Okay, so he's not a Christian. Well, I take that back. I'm sorry I said that. If I remember right, he says he believes in God and he is a Christian. So I take that back. However, you're going to have to judge for yourself. All right? He defined conservatism as really a defense of what is. Now let's stop there for a second. Joe, would you put conservatism is that a decent definition?
Generally, conservatives want to maintain the status quo. They want to,
yeah.
So I understand.
So it's helpful. It's helpful. It's not totally, but it's helpful, right? So we want to conserve what is. We want to conserve tradition, keep things. But watch this. Does he really want to keep the things the way they are? It's a love of what you already have, and fear that it could all disappear. I think those are all helpful. A sense of the fragility of the world and the importance of being pragmatic. Okay, stop for a second. I think being pragmatic is very good. It's very good and very helpful, and conservatives should be pragmatic. But that line is setting you up for what's coming next. You got to be pragmatic, not having some ideological abstraction you want to force onto reality, but understanding reality as something that can give you occasions for change. Now that doesn't make any sense. I want to maintain what is, but I want to look for occasions to change. Which one is it? And he says, or they say, the article says, and he says, which we need. But also warnings for excessive change and excessive radicalism. He warns against excessive change and excessive radicalism. He calls himself a conservative. He's a homosexual. Okay? And he talked about God and religion and how conservatives are wrecking the country because they're being too radical. And this, I believe, is a picture of the change that we are seeing in America. This is it right here. Because we've taken people who wanted to conserve what we have and change it. I talked to you about Pete, the Englishman, and I'm sorry, they're both Englishmen, but he's on the shores of the Columbia River in Oregon, and he's talking about the Wild West and how he loves the Wild West in America, and yet he wants to change it. He wants the government to be able to mandate things. Well, that's not America. And this is not America. This is not the way America was. And yet, well, and, you know, again, underlying currents, and we've had presidents who wanted to change, and you can go back to Wilson and some of these other people who just really radically changed America in some ways. So there is that, but that's not conservatism, okay? So this is really very concerning, and this is, to be frank with you, this is where we're going. The progressives, they're clear, we see them, they call themselves Democrats or progressives, but now we have conservatives saying, I'm a conservative, but I want change, and I want radical change. And yet he says he doesn't want radical change. That's a complete lie. At just 36% support, Biden slips to a record low in a new poll. The economy's stupid. Change versus more of the same. Those people, that Carver said that out of the Clinton administration, the economy's stupid. And change versus more of the same. And that's really the issue. People are, especially the libertarians or independents, they're jumping ship on President Biden in a big way. Some Democrats are. We're going to have to continue to see what happens. However, maybe even worse, the Kamala crisis, top Harris advisors resigns as embattled Vice President faces reports of office dysfunction, horrific poll numbers. Now, yes, I've had her up there for 2 weeks in a row. I can't remember if it's 3, but this story keeps ramping up as well. She's a problem. When she said she was going to go to the border, she instead went to California several times, her home state, which your tax money is paying for. And it just drives me crazy. Let's see, do I have... Oh yeah, there it is. As expected, there's a huge partisan divide with Democrats by a 87-7 margin giving the president a thumbs up and Republicans disapproving 94-4. Only 29% of independent voters approve of how Biden's handling his duties steering the country, with 56% disapproving. The president stood at 49% approval and 51% approval in a separate national poll at Marquette. Concerning the vice president, cringe, Kamala Harris doesn't get it. Here's a tweet by Andrew Clark, whoever that person is. Holt, do you have plans to visit the border? Harris, we've been to the border. We've been to the border. Holt, you haven't been to the border. Harris, and I haven't been to Europe. I don't understand the point you're making. Okay, so we need another vice president. World migration woes. Over 23,000 migrants have crossed into the UK, that island, using boats over the English Channel, with a record number of almost 1,200 making the crossing in a single day on Thursday, Veterans Day. These numbers are an almost threefold increase since National File filmed the groundbreaking documentary Destination Dover, Migrants in the Channel, in October 20. At the end of last year, just over 8,000 illegal immigrants had made the dangerous crossing, which although now seems small in comparison, were shocking figures at the time. So the migration crisis, we talked about it in Poland and Belarus and all happening there, but it's extending clear to the UK and in record numbers even as we speak to this day. The CBO confirms Biden lied. Now, again, I'm not going to say that he lied. I'm reading an article that says he lied. Updated numbers from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection show that in past fiscal year, the U.S. Border Patrol encountered almost 1,700,000 unlawful border crossings, roughly double the total for the fiscal year preceding the pandemic and 4 times the total for the fiscal year coinciding with the pandemic. So there's Britain and us are in the same boat. Ours is just a little bit bigger. Number 2, the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, estimate on Build Back Better. For much of the fall, Joe Biden, members of his administration, and congressional Democratic leaders such as Nancy Pelosi have insisted that the Build Back Better bill costs nothing. And we've heard this over and over again. That just doesn't make any kind of sense to me. You heard counter arguments that the bill costs a lot more than nothing from many, many conservatives. The director of the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office said on Monday that the IRS proposal would yield far less than what the White House was counting on to help pay for its bill, about $120 billion over a decade versus the $400 billion that the administration is counting on. That is not even close. And I'm just going to suggest this, that if they can't get closer than that on their numbers, they shouldn't be up there making numbers. And we're going to see in 2022 and 2024 just how deep a crisis the United States is in. Now, I would say it's really deep. Do we get a reprieve? We're going to have to wait and see as far as the government is concerned and God's mercy. Along with this government, the U.S. Embassy in Pakistan repeatedly hangs up on a veteran pleading for help. This man is in Afghanistan. Yeah, I didn't have it. There's a veteran in Afghanistan. He's got a family, and he needs to get them out. And so he's calling the embassy in Pakistan, and they would not. They hung up on him. He couldn't get through on another line, so they tried another one. And when they got him, they kept hanging up on him. They hung up several times. And this is reported by Fox News. So I'll tell you what, that is a disgrace. The U.S. holds historic. Now, here's something that is really strange, and it is not on headline news. I haven't seen it anywhere else except this liberal station. Actually, I have. When I investigated it, when I looked into it, it is happening. This is the truth. But this is weird, and so we're just going to have to continue to watch. I think Biden is running scared here, so let's watch what happens. The U.S. holds historic oil and gas lease sale in the Gulf of Mexico days after the climate summit. The Biden administration on Wednesday is opening more than 80 million acres in the Gulf of Mexico to auction for oil and gas drilling. A record offshore lease sale that will lock in years of planet-warming greenhouse gas emissions. Notice, this is CNBC calling Biden out on the greenhouse emission issue. It's funny. The lease sale is a major reversal of Biden's commitment to shut down new oil and natural gas leases on public lands and waters. The move comes only days after the president's pledge to aggressively slash emissions during the United Nations Climate Summit in Glasgow, Scotland. The Biden administration has approved 3,100 new drilling permits on public lands. That's 332 a month, a faster pace than the Trump plan at 300 per month. This fossil fuel production is at odds with Biden's aggressive climate agenda, including a pledge to cut U.S. greenhouse emissions in half by 2030 and reach net zero emissions by 2050. What is going on here? I can suggest two things. One, he's very concerned about the gas prices. But two, follow the money. Because that's what he did with the pipeline when the railroads got transporting that oil back in their pockets. And I believe that's my personal opinion. A U.S. thirst for Russia oil hits record high despite the tough talks. So we're buying more oil from Russia. And just this, and we're going to watch this. This is Breitbart. You know, they're conservative and sometimes they get a little bit on the edge here. But Russia oil tankers will deliver in Boston Harbor this winter as a result of Biden's policies. We're going to watch this oil issue as the Russians and others are using oil and gas as a weapon against Europe, and now will it be used as a weapon against the United States? We'll continue to see what happens. The overdose deaths reached record high as the pandemic spread. Now, there's one other one that's blaming Biden for this. That's ridiculous. But this is a major issue. We've talked about this a little bit on Sunday nights. We'll bring it up every once in a while. Opioid deaths is really a pandemic in the United States and elsewhere, but especially here. Drug issues across the globe is a major problem, and I believe that's another sign of the end times as well. Okay, let's get into just real briefly here some things. This is really, I find this interesting. Here's China, and we've talked about this a little bit before. They're the #1 producer of coal by far. Okay, 78 metric tons. I can't remember if it's a day or whatever that is. And then Indonesia is second. Look at the numbers, 78 versus 48, not even close. Okay, China is also the #1 importer of coal. So they've got more coal than anybody else by far, and they're using it up. Okay? And by the way, I didn't know much about this, but there's differences in coal. Some you can use for making iron and some other things, and some you just throw in the stove to get warm by. But so Australia is the #1 Chinese coal importer. I should say China imports more coal from Australia than anybody else. Australia sends more coal to China than anybody else. That's what I'm saying there. Now, I want to remind you of the oil and gas disputes we've talked about in the last few months. Everybody remember that? Where in the East Timor, between Australia and Timor, there's some problems there, and the Chinese are working with East Timor to try to get that oil and gas out of the ocean there, and they're trying to access land or waters that are pretty close to the Australian coasts. And so they have this tit for tat that's been going on for a while. All right? Then you remember that Australia made the nuclear deal with the United States, made France mad, and some other countries, by the way. But the UK, the United States, and Australia are now in this deal to share nukes and nuke secrets. So this has really upset China. Okay, so you've got all this in the background, the oil and the nuke issue. Now the ships are stuck. Australian ships are stuck in the Chinese harbor for up to 12 months. The Australian coal ships. These are shipping coal, which China needs. Okay. Now, just recently, there's been major floods in China, and and mines have been flooded, and then there's been a change in the safety and environmental regulations in China. So now you can see what's happening to the coal industry in China, that is being gripped. So what China has done recently is, number one, ramped up coal mining, get on it. Number two, imported more. They've mandated less energy on households and businesses, and they've made banks make risky loans to get more coal out of the ground. This wasn't enough. So finally, China let the Australians unload the ships. China manufacturing shrank for only the second time in modern history this year. The biggest provinces in China only have 10 to 14 days of coal left. This was as of Tuesday or so. Now, why did China do this? Because the Australian Prime Minister called for a Wuhan investigation. And so China said, okay, no more coal from Australia. So they really cut their own throat, or at least hit themselves in the nose. They made a rash decision, and it's hurt them. And by the way, this has affected shipping worldwide as well. So China did that, and now you've got this big issue between the West and the East over this. United States is involved, France is involved, everybody's involved. Now, they have a history of this, and this is really interesting. Okay, you see on the right, there's a book there, and it's got this knife or sword, and it's stuck through these bugs and a bird and a mouse. Okay? In 1950, I think it was Mao. Mao went communist, total absolute communist, and he said, we're going to be self-reliant, and so we're going to ramp up. We're going to make all of our food here. We're going to put all of our people to work, and we're going to export, but we're not going to import. We're going to rely on our own people. Okay. One of the things that they started on was wheat, and they got on the issue of growing wheat, and they found out that a sparrow, there's a little sparrow there. I can't remember the name of the sparrow, but the sparrow was eating wheat. And one sparrow, they figured, ate about 4 pounds of wheat in a year. So they said, okay, kill the sparrow. And they almost wiped out this sparrow. But when they almost wiped out this sparrow, the insects increased. The locusts, in particular, they said, came back like crazy and ate more wheat than the sparrow ever could have. This is what human beings do. And this is, even to this day, is happening even now. And I think the United States needs to be careful of that. That's that sparrow. Africa. The only thing you need to know about Africa is Tigray troops are moving in on the Ethiopian capital. And this is a huge civil war right now in Ethiopia. And Sudan, the coup is still in effect. Now, if I remember right, yesterday they might have released that the prime minister or the president there, but protesters are still protesting and being killed by the government there. Now think about this. Sudan was in a civil war. They came out of it. They made a treaty with Israel, and then they went back on that, and now they're back in a civil war, and there's a coup, and it's a complete disaster. And remember that place also is part of the Ezekiel War. Russians preparing to attack Ukraine by late January. This is just out today. Ukraine Defense Intelligence Agency says this is still ramping up. We're going to have to just wait and see. The Russian troops are on the Ukrainian border, and we're just going to have to see what they will do. I mentioned last week that Israel and Russia talked, and then a day or two after Putin and Bennett talked, Israel attacked some Iranian troops and some places, some militias in Syria, and Russia was probably going to get mad. Well, they did. Israel-Syria attacks are an unacceptable response unconstructive, says Russia. So that didn't last a day. Israel launches airstrikes on Damascus. Israel carried out airstrikes on the Syrian capital, and drones targeted Iranian positions in Deir ez-Zor. Remember what Putin said. The one thing you can't do is upset Assad, and they did. Damascus is mad. Pentagon has intelligence of increasing presence of Russian Spetsnaz, Special Forces, GRU, and SVR, intelligent operatives on the ground trying to use oligarchs and security forces to create a pretext for an invasion of Ukraine. I should have put that up further. Gazprom, which is the state-owned gas company and is Russia, did not book the Yarmel Europe gas pipeline capacity for December. They're withholding gas. And the additional capacities of the Ukrainian GTS for gas transit to Europe. So they're withholding gas from Europe. We've been following that issue as well. The State Department confirms that Russia today conducted an irresponsible missile test with satellites and said that the experiment has so far caused more than 1,500 pieces of traceable fragments and hundreds of thousands of small pieces that now threaten the interest of all countries. This experiment will significantly endanger astronauts and cosmonauts on the International Space Station and other human flights. Russia's dangerous and irresponsible behavior endangers the long-term sustainability of our outer space, and clearly shows that Russia's claims that it opposes space armament are illogical and hypothetical. This follows, remember 3 or 4 weeks ago now, China had what they said was a satellite in space that could crush other satellites. And now for the first time in anywhere, any nation, a nation test fires a missile in space. It did it on its own vehicle, but now it's causing problems with these pieces. But that's not the whole problem. The whole problem now is they hit this thing, and so what else can they hit in space? And you see where all these nations are trying to go. Now, you remember the Abraham Accords and all the good that Trump did. Last week's 5-day drill in the Red Sea was the first time in history that forces from Bahrain, Israel, the UAE, and the U.S. Navy trained together. There is now a large organized bloc of countries opposed to Iran's ambitions of regional leadership hegemony. After the Abraham Accords altered the geopolitical landscape, Israel was moved from the U.S. European Command's area of responsibility to Central Command, making it easier for U.S. to organize joint military drills in Israel. Another joint training exercise this month involves 500 U.S. Marines who trained with Israeli commandos. Now, Biden said he wanted out of the Middle East. And yet, here's another good thing I think he's doing. He is keeping this coalition together. In fact, he may even be strengthening it. Saudi Arabia and Iran were talking. Those talks are really not going too far. Saudi is kind of a loose link in this whole issue. They're kind of playing both fields. But this Abraham Accords is still a big deal. And this coalition is strong, Ezekiel 38 said it would be. In October, Air Force units from France, Germany, Greece, India, Italy, the UK, and US flew in biennial blue flag drill over Israel, the largest number of countries in the exercise since it began in 2013. In July, Israel hosted American, British, and German drone operators. In June, Israel, the UK, and the US flew F-35s together as part of the tri-lighting exercise. In March, Cyprus and France joined the Israel-led Noble Dina naval drill for the first time. Now, we mentioned some of this last week, but they continue to have this, and so that's that coalition, that's that divide that's happening in for the Ezekiel 38 war. Really the west and the east, and if you will, the north and the south. These troops will come from the north. They're going to, at some point, all of these people are going to give Israel up. And that's a really interesting concept. Biden didn't do it. Not yet, anyway. He really started to move out of the Middle East and away from Israel. but he's doing things behind the scene that are surprising. The oil thing in the Gulf of Mexico, and this is actually quite surprising of this administration. These exercises are building a new alliance systems with Israel at its linchpin. Military units that practice with Israel forces gain real combat expertise and signal that Jerusalem has allies. Well, they will not have allies. They now have allies. Increasingly working to confront potential threats in the region where belligerent actors once faced a series of isolated countries, they'll now have to tangle with an organized alliance. This just is so prophetic. In Ezekiel 36 and 37, Israel becomes a mighty host. They come very strong. How long do they stay there? Do they get stronger? Will they increase their borders? We're just going to have to wait and see. Jordan is still a weak link. They're a problem in this system. And again, like I said, Saudi Arabia really hasn't come fully around. And they're the big dog in the fight in the south there. So we'll just continue to watch and see. Bilateral trade between Israel and the UAE. Remember, the Arabs and the Jews now is outstripping all expectations and is further expected to pass $1 billion this year, according to the chairman of the Israel Export Institute. We expected it would take a few years to reach $1 billion annually in bilateral trade, but we are very close to it and we're exceeding all predictions. By the end of 2021, bilateral trade will be much higher than $1 billion, and that's before we even have the figure for technology services. This is Ezekiel 37. This is Israel becoming very strong and favored by some nations, and yet the pride is going to go to their head and it's going to be a problem. Biden, here's another surprise. Number 3, they come in threes, right? Biden unfreezes weapon sales to the UAE. He's selling 50 F-35s, and actually this was Trump's idea, but Biden froze it. The deal was introduced in the final days of the Trump administration, and in addition to a very formidable fleet of 50 F-35s, also 18 Reaper drones and associated munitions. The whole package will cost the UAE an estimated $23 billion. Qatar, this is huge. Qatar has formally requested its own fleet of F-35s. The timing is suspicious, giving UAE's go-ahead and denial by Congress of Turkey's request. I wrote that, this was from an article, but I wrote that last line myself. Because Turkey and Qatar are like that. And if Qatar gets the F-35, Turkey will have access to the F-35 and possibly the Russians too. So there are some people very suspicious about Qatar and the F-35. We're going to have to watch and see what happens there. Russian military exports company announced that they have started technology transfer for the production of some of the S-400 air defense systems to Turkey. So Russia and Turkey are still like that. Now, I'll just ask this question. I don't know if you know if this is a man or a woman. I don't know, but this is Iran. This is not Iranian individual. I'll put it that way. That's an Iranian individual. He or she is a soccer player. It's supposed to be a she. All right. Speaking to the Iranian news agency Khabar Online, the coach of the Iranian women's team said the conversation surrounding the goalkeeper's gender was just an excuse not to accept defeat against Iranian women. After the Jordanian team's defeat, it was natural for them to try to calm themselves down under false pretexts. So Jordan lost and said, okay, you guys have a male goalkeeper on the women's team. The Iranian national team has previously been accused of fielding men in the national football team in 2014. 4 players were banned after failing general tests, and 8 players were accused of being males. There's the 15 team. I threw that in there because that's how Iran is playing games with this whole gender thing. They're against gender changing gender as Arabs and Muslims, and yet they'll play that game. It's just hypocrisy. The US dollar hits a 25-year low against the Israeli shekel. Ezekiel 37, again, Israel growing stronger, America in decline. Where does it end? We're not sure. Palestinians fear a civil war. I'm not going to read that. Hebron and some other places, see the guns there? They have guns and weapons on the West Bank. They're shooting people. Significant problems there. This is the seal of Isaiah. That's named because Isaiah's name is on the seal. In 2015, archaeologists announced that they had discovered the bulla, a clay impression of a seal of the king of Hezekiah, who ruled Judea in the late 8th and early 7th century BC, at a site in Jerusalem. Just 10 feet away, the excavation team unearthed another bulla bearing the name Isaiah. Now, the question is, was the Isaiah bulla for the prophet Isaiah? There are many doubts that it was, but the point is that it was discovered there. Why did I bring that up? Well, it's interesting, but I just want to finish with this, and I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes here, Gary, but Gary is doing an excellent job in Isaiah, and he's about ready to finish up, and I told him this morning I think he ought to start again and just go way back. But anyway, I want to go through a little bit because hardly anybody here was there this morning. But watch this. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall a land be born in one day? Shall a nation be brought forth in a moment, in one moment? I'll make this bigger for you all. For you all. A sound from the temple, the sound of the Lord, rendering recompense to his enemies. Okay, I'm sorry, go down. Shall a nation be brought forth in one moment? As soon as Zion was in labor, she brought forth her children. Shall I bring to the point of birth and not cause to bring forth? Says the Lord, shall I cause to bring forth, shut the womb? Says your God. Rejoice with Jerusalem and be glad for her, all you who love her. Now, this concept of being a Zionist, and I didn't mention it this morning, and I think that's the first time I've mentioned it. I've been cautious in doing this. But I'm going to ask you a question. Are you a Zionist? And the question is, well, what is a Zionist? It's not that maybe, some of us love Zion. We've been there, Jerusalem, and we want to go again. But that's not really what it means. It means we love her and we want to see her prosper. Okay? That's Zionism. All right? God is a Zionist. It's his city. Rejoice with Jerusalem and be glad for her, all you who love her. Rejoice with her in joy. Watch this. All you who mourn over her. When Gary was reading this morning, this whole prophetic image just came to my heart, my head, that we're all mourning over Jerusalem right now. Now, maybe some aren't, but we are because we know what she's going to go through. We see what's happening and what she's going to go through. This coalition government that she has is pathetic. The conservatives there are very sad for her, but we're supposed to rejoice that you may nurse and be satisfied. Who's going to be satisfied? And who's going to be nursed from her consoling breast? That you may drink deeply with delight from her glorious abundance. For thus says the Lord, behold, I will extend peace to her like a river, and the glory of the nations like an overflowing stream. Who's going to be nursing? Who's going to be accepting the praise and not the praise, but the blessings from Jerusalem? The world. The nations. It was supposed to be that way in the first place. And you shall nurse. Who? The nations shall nurse. You shall be carried upon her hip and bounced upon her knees. Isn't that a great picture? All these mighty nations who hate her, number one, and all these mighty nations are way bigger than her, way more prosperous in the past, many of them, U.S., are going to be bounced on her knee. As one whom his mother comforts, so I will comfort you, the nations. You shall be comforted in Jerusalem. When Jesus is up there, when Israel has her, they're going to bless the nations. You shall see, and your heart shall rejoice. Your bones shall flourish like the grass, and the hand of the Lord shall be known to his servants, and he shall show his indignation against his enemies. This is why we keep Jerusalem and Israel before us, because Jesus did, because God did, Isaiah did. And again, I appreciate Gary making the statement known that Isaiah is the only complete book ever found at Qumran. And it was, I believe, just like Gary said this morning, I'll echo his statement, that it was for a reason. It's the best prophetic book in the Bible, and I think not aside from Revelation, but I think in coordination with Revelation and Daniel. I think those three books, and then of course all the other books, you can't really unlock them all, unlink them all. But that one in particular in the Old Testament is vital for us understanding the Old Testament and the New and what is to come. All right, let's finish with that. Lord, we're grateful for your mercy and your grace, and we praise you. We honor you. I just want to pray for our friends in Montana. I'm just thinking of them right now as they have the virus. Lord God, be with them. Heal them right now, Lord God, we pray. And for others who are sick in our town and others who have lost loved ones recently, we just pray for their comfort, Lord God. Help us in our hearts and our minds going forward. Strengthen our hands. Give us strong hands and strong knees and a very stiff forehead against the enemy, Lord God, we pray. But a kind heart as well, one that tends toward your word and the love for others. We worship you and praise you in Jesus' precious name. Amen.